On January 2nd, 2011, Virgil began sawing the 250-plus pieces of green abalone, faux turquoise, and gold mother-of-pearl for the dragon's tails that were to be inlaid into the fretboard. The process took over 6 weeks to complete.
For Christmas, I had made the girls jewelry boxes, and I was doing all this inlay. I did an inlay for my mom, wanted me to do an inlay for a jewelry box of hers, so you know, I was really cutting my teeth learning how to do these inlays. I knew I was ready at that moment, right after the holidays, to start cutting the inlays for the dragon tails and the fretboard.
Virgil's process to do the inlay is he first prints out the drawing from his computer, cuts out the images, then superglues the images to the materials being laid. After it dries, the shape is cut with a very fine jeweler's saw on a bird's beak, which is a device made for cutting inlay. Then the pieces are soaked in an acetone to remove the paper. After all pieces are cut, he then prints out a reverse image of the entire drawing, tapes it on the flatboard, then covers it with wax paper. After this, he glues all the pieces to the image and the board upside down. This can be tedious work, because a lot of the time the pieces need extra filing with jeweler's files to make them fit with each other properly.
When it gets flipped over, everything has to be flush to the surface. Different inlay materials are going to be different thicknesses. Like my green abalone is actually 30 thousandths thick, and like the gold mother of pearl, for instance, is 60 thousandths thick. So you don't want to have that unevenness.
After the inlay image is glued together, he then flips it over, peels off the wax paper, and cleans up the excess glue. Next, he paints the surface with a yellow tempera poster paint, then glues the whole piece to the dried poster paint surface with white glue. Next, the image is traced with a razor. The razor makes a clear line through the poster paint, and the image pops off easily since it is glued to the poster paint, not the wood.
I had learned different inlay techniques from these different artists. By the time I was done with these dragon tails, I definitely had confidence with moving on with the guitar.
After the image is popped off, then the wood is routed with a Dremel and special router base. Even though it may sound simple, it still comes with its own hitches.
Yeah, it rarely fits. I mean, you might get lucky with some of the smaller pieces, but the larger pieces, it just never fits in there. So you're ending up having to route some more to get it fit in there. And eventually it'll go in with some duct tape and a hammer.
After the piece is fitted, he then superglues the object in place, then cleans up dried glue with a sanding block.
Yeah, one of the biggest problems with this part of the process is the cyanoacrylate falls in between the inlay and the substrate that you're putting it into, and it likes to form these little bubbles. So after the glue dries, you're basically sanding it down. When you're sanding down a bubble will turn into a cup, and that cup likes to hold all the dust that you're creating by sanding. So you end up with all these little pockets that are holding the sawdust in there. You have to basically pick all those little dust things out, and then you go back in and you add more glue there, and then you wait for it to make more bubbles on you and then you sand it down again. Sometimes it could be 6-7 times you're going back over again, just trying to get rid of these little bubbles that are just causing these little spots that you're seeing all around the inlay.
The process takes quite a bit of time, especially with a large inlay. After the inlay of the tails, Virgil was ready to move on to the cutting out of the headstock and the installing of the truss rod.
I first did cut out the headstock on a scrap piece of walnut, then I cut into the actual maple, and that was pretty cool. Then I moved on to the truss rod. I had to install that into the neck, and then I moved on to shaping the body contours a little bit more.
After the neck and body were worked on, Virgil ran into a major roadblock for inlaying the dragons into the flamed maple guitar top.
My original idea was to have a translucent burgundy paint on top of the flamed maple of the guitar. However, that had to be nixed because I was about to inlay wood. The wood would have a problem getting inlaid into there because the translucent paint could possibly seep into that. Something of this nature could have destroyed the entire project, and I wasn't about to go down that road.
Virgil remembered watching a DVD by Larry Robinson that if you used darker wood, inlay work tended to be more forgiving.
This was when I started my search for Gabon ebony. I had no idea how expensive it was, and I ended up searching the internet for almost 2 weeks to find the perfect piece of wood for the guitar.
First thing, when I came over, he handed me this big black chunk of wood. It looked like coal, and said, "Well, we need to make you resaw this down to about 1/4 of an inch." And it might have even been, yeah, about 3/16 of an inch to be exact. So what I had to do is take it to the shop, stand it up on edge, and it was so tall that I couldn't run it through. It was too hard to begin with. I couldn't run it through a bandsaw because it wanted to walk on me. So I had to run it through the table saw on a series of cuts and raise the blade, and then without cutting my fingers off. So every pass I'd make, I had to flip the board back over, run it through again, and then so I could leave about 1/8 of an inch, to hold them together. Then I could run it through the bandsaw. And then after I ran it through the bandsaw, I had to take it into the surface sander and run it through and clean up each edge, and then in that process I had to just yield as many 1/4 inch pieces as I could, because it was like black gold. Beautiful wood, incredible deep grain on it, but it was very nerve-wracking because I was, didn't want to mess up his expensive wood. It was very, very beautiful, and I knew darn well that if I screwed it up, he'd probably have my head.
I was excited to see what the ebony was going to look like. Tony and I decided to split jobs. I was to inlay this piece of ebony into the headstock, and he was going to inlay it into the body.
Virgil worked for several days putting the inlay into the headstock, but had noticed the wood was cupping on him quite a bit.
When you cut wood into sheets, it's called resawing. What happens is, with a block of wood, you're going to have moisture that's in the center of the wood. So therefore, when you're cutting these sheets, anything that ends up being dry, like on the outside of that, what it's going to do is it's actually going to pull on it. So therefore, it's going to cause this cupping. And we really didn't know about this at the time, but later on we would pay the price for the lack of that knowledge.
After the headstock was complete, Virgil moved on to cutting the pieces for the dragons. This would be an arduous process, but Virgil knew there was no turning back now.
One of the things I found on YouTube one night, this guy was actually burning the edges of these little leaves he was making that was going to be for an inlay for a coffee table. So I said, man, I got to do this for the dragon. So what I started doing was I got my little saucepan and I started cooking all this leopard wood in there to get this little burning effect around the edges of all the wing webbing inside of there. It looked like a little drop shadow in there. It was really cool.
As Virgil was plugging away at all the pieces for the dragon, he was taken off guard by an unexpected phone call from Tony.
Well, Virgil was working on a headstock and he was doing an inlay, and with that beautiful border that goes around to highlight all the black ebony. So I told him what I could do is do the actual body, so it had the same 1/8 inch reveal all the way around. So I told him I could take it to the shop and use a router bit, and what I was going to do is I made a template. I was going to follow the template in order to keep the 1/8 inch maple band, if you will, and then we were going to fill the rest in with that ebony. However, when I was working, just starting to make my first cut, I got about halfway through, and I think either the bit heated up or I may have been taking out a little bit too much, but it got hot and we had a blowout. It blew the whole side of the banding out, and then that's when I had to give Virgil a call.
Okay, it's the 7-month anniversary. Seven months and 2 days working on the guitar. Still trying to quit smoking, but it's hasn't fully succeeded yet. I got a call from Tony this morning. Actually, I got a text message, and Tony's working on the body, and he's supposed to be routing out the body and put the ebony in, and he had an accident, so I'm going to call him up. I guess I should get my phone. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back.
kill me?
I don't know. Should I?
Dude, I'm so frustrated.
What happened?
I ran 2 freaking samples.
Right?
The perimeter was perfect. I was like, man, this is sweet. Said, all right, time to rock and roll. I put it down on the guitar, started running it, got about halfway around, a bit snapped on me and freaking broke out the whole 1/8" reveal. I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
Well, after the phone conversation with Virgil, which was pretty gut-wrenching, by the way, I decided that the best option, what we could do is I could mill everything back down, so it was completely on the maple, and then basically that was our only option at that point. I just had to break it to Virgil that way. So what we did was we milled it down, and then we glued the ebony on solid, so the whole entire top was going to be an ebony.
Overcoming the first problem with the inlay of the ebony, they were presented yet with another problem with the cupping of the ebony.
The day had finally arrived when Tony dropped off the body that had the new ebony top on there, and the next morning I got started on it, and all of a sudden my worst nightmare came true.
So Virgil sends me this picture on my cell phone of the ebony after I had glued it on there, and there's this huge Grand Canyon crack going down the side, and I think, oh no.
Because of the cupping, the wood started to crack on the ebony top. Virgil frantically attempted to fix it with super glue.
Cyanoacrylate is pretty interesting stuff because as these cracks were forming, I was filling with the cyanoacrylate, and it actually will start pulling these edges to each other. What I didn't realize that by all that pressure that was being pulled here, that more cracks were going to form in between those cracks that I was filling with this stuff. So every time I filled a crack, all of a sudden another one would appear. Then I'd fix that one, then another one. It was like this Bugs Bunny cartoon gone wrong.
Virgil was forced to put the inlay of the dragons on hold for the next few weeks while the wood settled into his new home. In the meantime, Virgil ran into an even larger problem.